Hello everyone, and welcome to the next video in Module 8. This is about the two main rituals, which are Blot and Sumbel. So let's talk about these. These are essentially the most important rituals in heathenry, okay? And you'll find them referred to a lot, but let's look at what do we know about them? How were they done in the past? How can we bring them together and use them in our modern day? So, what is Blot then, or Bloat? Heathen festivals are often named Bloat after the most important one of our rituals, the Bloat. For instance, you've got Alpha Bloat, Sigur Bloat, Disir Bloat, and so on. And Bloat is the old Germanic word for sacrifice, okay? i.e. giving some kind of offering or gift, okay? That's what it essentially means, is we're giving some sort of sacrifice, some offering, okay? It is essentially the literal embodiment of the gift-giving cycle of hospitality itself. It's we give and then they give. We give, they give. Okay, that is what Blot is. Now, some people say that Blot, because it seems close to the word blood, actually means blood, but actually the word for blood is hlot. Okay, and you'll find that is, for instance, the sprinkling twig, the hlot twig. Okay. And the hlot bowl. Okay, so it does not actually mean blood. It just means a sacrifice or an offering or a gift. But it is related to the Old English root word of bloedsian, which means blessing. Okay, so it's not just sacrifice and give. It's also referring to blessings as well. Okay, and the blessings that come from giving that gift and sacrifice. As we talked about in the first video, it usually includes a sacred meal. And often it's some, like usually the blood part of it, is given to the gods and spirits, and some, usually the meat part, when it's an animal sacrifice anyway, is consumed by us. Okay, so it's a shared sacred meal. That's what the Blot is. The Anglo-Saxons even had a blood month, blood month, or well, no, it's not blood month, sorry, Blot month, which is November, and this was called that because, Bede says, they dedicated to their gods the cattle they were on the point of slaughtering. So what would happen is every November, roughly, it would just be going into winter. It's time for the farmers and that to decide which animals they can afford to keep during the winter and feed, and which ones were just going to be no good anymore. And so they would slaughter the ones that were no good anymore, so they had meat for the winter, and they would dedicate and sacrifice them to their gods. Okay, giving maybe the blood to the gods, and the meat they then preserve for the winter, or they'd feast on. Okay, in fact, Blot was so important that even Christians such as King Haakon had to attend in order to get his support, or to get support from others, basically, because he wanted to be king. Okay, and kings were often elected at that point, so they needed. He needed their help, people's help. And so because he needed the heathens' help, he had to attend heathen festivals. So a lot of blots did involve sacrifice of animals, okay, and blood was involved, as I said. However, nowadays we tend to use mead instead as the replacement, okay? We tend to give the mead to the gods. We may drink some of it ourselves, as you'll see in the Sumbel thing, but the main liquid we give to the gods is usually nowadays meat. Okay, sorry, mead. And blots are mentioned many times by writers throughout the history of heathenry. Okay, there's different places we could go to look, but there's one particular place, one particular example that gives a really good breakdown of how to do a blot ritual, and that's the one I'm going to focus on here to teach us how to do that. Okay, and that's the from Heimskringla, the saga of Hakon the Good. But you can find mention of blots throughout the lore in lots and lots of places. Okay, so this is a quote from Heimskringla, and I'm going to read it in full because it gives us all these different points that we need to be aware of. So it says, "It was an old custom that when there was to be a sacrifice, so a blot, all the bonds," so that's the free men basically, or free people, "should come to the spot where the temple stood and bring with them all that they required while the festival of the sacrifice lasted. To this festival, all the men brought ale with them, and all kinds of cattle, as well as horses, were slaughtered. And all the blood that came from them was called Blot, and the vessels in which it was collected were called Blot vessels. Blot staves were made, like sprinkling brushes, with which the whole of the altars and the temple walls, both outside and inside, were sprinkled over. And also the people were sprinkled with blood. But the flesh was boiled into savoury meat for those present. The fire was in the middle of the floor of the temple, and over it hung the kettles. And the 4 goblets were handed across the fire. And he who made the feast and was a chief blessed the 4 goblets and all the meat of the sacrifice. And first Odin's goblet was emptied for victory and power to his king. Thereafter Njord and Freya's goblets for peace and a good season. Then it was the custom of many to empty the Braga goblet, and then the guests emptied a goblet to the memory of departed friends, called the Remembrance Goblet. Okay, so here we can see the sort of how a feast or a blot was carried out. Now, it's important to note that this was recorded like 200 years after heathenry had finished in Iceland, okay? But chances are it is probably quite close to what was originally right, and it's the closest we've got, so we use it as our inspiration. And you can see various things happen. So you've got, firstly, people are bringing all their ale and their animals and sacrifices to the temple. They're being slaughtered and the blood's being collected. The blood's then being sprinkled over the altars, over the temple walls, over the people. And that's the sort of offering to the gods. And the flesh of the animals is then being boiled into this sacred communal meal, and they're all sharing it, okay? There's a big fire, and there's kettles where they cook the food and the drink. And then you have these special goblets or drinks that are either, first they're handed across the fire, then they're being blessed by the chief, and he also blesses the meat, and then there's special drinking rounds, okay? You've got Odin's goblet first, then you've got Njord and Frey's goblet, then you've got the Braga goblet, then you've got the Remembrance goblet, okay? So there's these different stages involved. So how do we do blot then? Okay, so you can see they brought things to the place. So first there's some sort of procession to the sacred space where you bring your offerings, okay? Then you make your main sacrifice, okay? Then you put the sacrificial liquid into the blot bowl, okay? Now maybe 2 and 3 actually could be the similar. If it's going to be mead, you maybe present the mead and then you pour it into the bowl, okay? Then you use hultane, which is the sprinkling twig. You can get that from a tree, like an ash tree is really good because you've got the twig and you've got leaves on either side, and you can just pick it off and drip it in and then sprinkle it over altar and gods, walls, people, etc. This also happens in Eyrbyggja saga, so it's not just a one-off. We know that this happened. Then you've got your goblets of liquid that are passed over the fire, and then the liquid and the food offerings all blessed, and then you eat your sacred meal. Okay, and after you've done your sacred meal, you then have some toast. So the first one is to the gods. This is to Odin, then to Njord and Freyr or Freya. Then you've got the Braga goblet. This is about oaths. Okay, so you're making oaths of things you're going to do. And then the third round is to the ancestors, or in memory of departed friends, basically. Okay, and that is basically the evidence we've got for how blot would be carried out. Okay, now some things to note on here. It doesn't give us instructions on how to set up or close down the sacred space. So we've gone through that in these videos, okay, on how to do that. So we're basically having to add that in ourselves. And I've suggested using those 9 steps that I said in the previous video, okay, to create the sacred space. It also doesn't really mention much detail in how the sacrifice was actually carried out, or what, if any, prayers were said. All it says is that these things were sacrificed. So we don't have any evidence of that. We're going to have to improvise because of that. And in module 3, we talked about particular prayers to use and things. So maybe we use some of those or adapt it using that. As I said before, I'm going to give you a ritual script that goes through how to do this, okay, for you. An important thing to note, okay, that's the bloat, but the toasting rounds seem to be very similar to what's called the Sumbel, which is the second of the rituals we're going to go through. And you'll see that maybe this is a combination of the both of them. But we'll go through that now, and then you'll understand what I mean. Okay. So, what is Sumbel? Okay, it's basically a formal ritual feast. Okay, Stephen Pollington says this: it's a formal rite with both a social and religious dimension. Was an event characterized by both festivity and seriousness. A structured affair where orderliness and participation in a traditional joint activity were the whole point. The feast, with strong drink, speech-making, gift-giving, and ritual, is in many ways the defining image of the warrior society presented in Beowulf. The occasion is serious, but not glum. There is laughter and comradeship, but not rowdiness or insolence. The strong drink is taken in a strict schedule, accompanied by ritual acts of self-definition, e.g. the making of vows, the offering of service, the acceptance of due rewards. Okay, so it's merry, and there's lots of drinking and festivity, but also very seriousness with a specific structure to follow. Okay, in particular things to do in there. The key part, though, is the ritual toasting. Okay, they are drinking in rounds, like we saw there. You've got drinks to the gods, then drinks to the Bragaful, then drinks to the ancestors, and so on. Okay. Now it's very formal and hierarchical. Okay, in history, normally that we start with the host and his wife, the sort of chieftain person, basically, will be the first one who's drinking. Okay. Now, you don't have to pass things around in a circle, the drink around in a circle. Okay, you don't have to do the toasting in a circle. Okay, it would go in hierarchical order of who's like the highest down to the lowest person. Obviously, we don't have that sort of social structure now, but that's what they had at that time. Okay, so it doesn't have to go into a circle. That's a modern idea. But if we look in Beowulf, for instance, anyone can do the toast. Okay, depending on the order that their hierarchy is in. And interestingly, in this one, each person will make the toast, and then everybody will drink. Okay. Now, what does that mean? That means that the lore suggests that each person has their own horn and their own cup, rather than something being passed around. Now, there is examples of things being passed around, but for the most part, when we look at something like Beowulf, you've got the horn, and the woman is taking the horn up and pouring it into each person's cup, and then the person would make their toast or oath or whatever, and everyone drinks. Okay. So as I said, the drink is served usually by the head woman of the household. Okay, but sometimes they've also got special ale bearers who carry this central horn round and pour it into the guests' cups and horns. Okay, so if you're going to do this together with a group of people, maybe you want to have one person who's the ale bearer. Everyone brings their own cups and horns, and the ale bearer takes the big horn round, pours it for everybody. Now, it doesn't also have to be mead. Okay, now mead is traditional and it's special, so it's a good idea to have mead. But historically, they included ale, cider, wine, and beer too. Okay, we know that there's things called ales and beer cups. We know that there's beer halls and wine halls and mead halls. So all of these different alcohols are perfectly fine. Okay, I don't recommend going with more stronger stuff like spirits, because the aim here is not to be getting drunk. It's to, yes, you want to be a bit merry and festive, but it's a serious religious activity. Okay. Now, it usually takes place in a hall. Okay, there are some outdoors examples, but usually it's in a hall. Okay, there's no weapons allowed in this hall. Okay, you have to be in this state of frith, this state of peace, this state of mutual security and mutual peace, basically, between you. There's feasting involved. Okay, there's gift giving involved. Okay, they often the leader, the chieftain, will give gifts out. There's often things like speeches. There's vows and oaths, or beot as they're called. Beot sorry. There's often music and poetry going on. You've got a shop which recites poetry and stories and genealogy. So there's lots of these things going on. Feasting, gift-giving, speeches, oaths, music and poetry, okay? It's very much a big festive event, okay? And there seems to be in three, or at least three key toasts, okay? The first one is a toast to the gods. And you've got various gods mentioned in different texts. Odin, Thor, Freya, Frey, Njord. And there seems to have been a cup or a round for each god being honoured, okay? So it's not that there's 3 rounds. There could be many rounds, but 3 key toasts, okay? So if you've got, say you want to honour 5 gods, you might have actually 5 rounds of toasts first as the toast to the gods round, okay? Then you've got the bragaful or the bragaful, which means like best cup or chieftain's cup, okay? And this seems to be a special cup or a bowl sometimes actually that was brought in. And it's usually drunk when making vows or oaths. So for example, when you get a new chieftain coming in, they often have to drink this and make a vow before they're allowed to sit on the high seat for the first time. Okay, but it doesn't have to be that. It can just be all sorts of anyone who wants to make oaths and things like that and vows. And then you've got the mini, okay, which is a toast to the ancestors. It's a remembrance or a memory cup, okay. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be just to the ancestors. So you've got Olaf's saga and Sigdrifumal, where it's drinking to the memory of the gods. Whereas in other sources, like we've just seen in Heimskringla, it's drinking to the memory of the departed loved ones, okay. Nowadays, we tend to say it's more about the memory of the loved ones and the ancestors, okay. Now, the order can also change. So that's the 3, and I would suggest you do keep this order, but you can change it, okay? There's various examples of changing it. In Fagriskina, it's toast to the ancestors or heroes are first. Then you've got the gods, then it's the bragaful. And in Beowulf, the order is different again. Now, like I said, often in modern heathenry, we tend to go toast to gods, then ancestors or the mini, then do the bragaful at the end, okay? If you are on your own or you don't want to be making like oaths and things like that, what you could do is replace it with a toast to the land wights or the house wight instead. Or you can do some poetry or song rather than the oath, okay? In fact, the word bragaful can be related to the Norse god of poetry called bragi. So you could do that as a time to give some sort of poetry or poetic thing that you've written or a song, okay? And then you could go even further, and you could add a drinking to the elves, the Alfar, or the Modra Odysseus as part of round 1, the part of the toast to the gods bit, okay? So there's lots of things you can do to change this, but this is the basic structure. Toast to the gods, toast to the oaths and vows, and then a remembrance or memory cup to the ancestors, okay? Something that's important to point out, though, is that, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon text, we find that there's something called a thiol, okay? And he would basically challenge oaths that are too difficult or bad for the community, because when you've got this cup, you are it represents the well of weird and the word of the entire community. And if someone's breaking their oath or vow, that brings bad things into the weird, and so therefore it's the bad things into the weird for the whole community. And so someone would be there whose job it is basically to challenge anyone who makes an outrageous oath, particularly if they're getting drunk and stuff like that, and they're going to say all sorts of silly things. Or if they think it's going to be too difficult for that person, they'll challenge them and say, oh, are you really able to do this? We don't think you should do this, etc., etc. Okay, and they can overrule them. So that's just something to bear in mind. So let's have a look at some more sources. So Sumbel can be found in many sources. You've got Beowulf, Fagerskinner, Olaf's saga, Tryggvason, Saga of Hakon the Good. In Olaf's saga, Tryggvason, it's done basically to commemorate recently departed relatives. So it's part of a funeral rite. So you can also do it as part of other rites of passage as well. And as we saw when we talked about the Heimskringla passage, Hakon the Good shows it's being done alongside the Blot, okay, straight after the Blot, basically, at Yule. So let's have a look at something from Beowulf. It says, "Then for the Geatman, all together, a bench was cleared off in the beer hall, where the strong-willed ones went to sit. Proud in their strength, the thane held to his duties. He who bore the fair ale cup in his hand, poured the bright liquid. A shop sang at times. Clearly in Heorot there was joy for heroes. No small war troop of Danes and Wedras, Unferth spoke up, the song of Ecglaf, who sat at the feet of the Scyldings' lord." So this is talking about Sumbel. You've got your beer hall where all the warriors are coming in and sitting. You've got people bringing an ale cup round. You've got and pouring the liquid. You've got a shop, musicians singing. You've got speeches from people like Unferth and songs. Okay, so these are some of the elements we can see from Beowulf. So now we've seen sort of some of the history and how it's done. Let's look at the purpose of it. So the key purpose ultimately is about building community and social cohesion. That is the ultimate thing. It's less about honouring the gods and spirits here. It's more about community and social cohesion. And this is through celebration, through ritual, through feasting. Okay, it's aiming to bind participants together as one, enhance relationships between people, enhance the social order, in fact, and people's place in it. At that time, you've got the chief and the warriors, and then you've got freemen, and then you've got slaves and all that. So we've got a particular social order that it helped to reinforce that. Okay, and you've got certain aspects that are important to that social order. So the chief giving gifts to his warriors, and then they in turn pledging loyalty to him, and that helps to strengthen them all as a group. As I mentioned, the cup or the horn actually represents the well of weird or fate for that community. Okay, so when we're doing the Sumbel, we're putting things into the well of weird, into the well of fate that affects the whole community. Okay, and whatever's said over it goes into the community's collective weird or fate. Okay, so what that means is essentially in this ritual, you're attempting to weave your weird, okay, where you want it to go. Okay, you're doing some sort of magical act to affect fate in your life and in the community's life. Now, lady with a mead cup, or ale bearers as well, they take the lady with the mead cup, I should say, they take on the role of the Norns or the Valkyries. Okay, now Valkyries or Norns are related to well, they're normally female, and they're related to women and the way women were seen in Germanic cultures. So women were respected as magical and able to prophesy in the Germanic cultures. Okay, so they're then serving that to people. So it makes this ritual act magic. Okay, it's even just the giving, the pouring of the ale, the pouring of the mead, that is a magical act. Okay, now warriors are also give formal speeches. Okay, so they use often ritual words. Okay, now although this is often translated as a vow or boast, none of these terms, this is Pollington now, none of these terms quite capture the significance of the act of speaking ritual words. The Beot is closer to incantation than any kind of boasting. Okay, it's intended to fill the speaker and the audience with confidence, to strengthen his resolve to accomplish the task he has set himself, and to reaffirm the communal value of courage, facing danger on behalf of the host community. So it's very much about a magical act here. Okay, you're speaking more, if you're making a vow or a boast or a promise to do something or a speech, you're using ritual words, you're using an incantation basically, as a way of strengthening you, strengthening the community, getting ready for what you're going to do. Okay, so let's have a look a bit more at Beowulf in Sumbel. So Sumbel and Beowulf. Okay, particularly what Pollington talks about, because he has a book out called The Mead Hall, which goes into detail about how this all works. I highly recommend you read that book. Okay, so we'll go through sort of what happens. This is the order basically that happens in. So a horn is blown, and that summons the guests to the hall. You can see that depicted on the Bayeux tapestry and things like that. Then you get the guests entering, and they wash their hands. They do purification, as we've talked about. And the Havamal, in fact, mentions that guests need water and handcloth when they come in. So it does suggest really that purification is an important part here. The chief enters the hall and he directs each person to the correct seat based on their rank. Okay. And the guests then sit when the chief signals them to do so. At that point, you've got the lady, the wife of the chief normally, enters the hall with a special drinking vessel. So this would be like maybe the big horn. And she greets the gathering and the warriors. So she says some stuff. And then she first offers it to the drink to the chief, okay, and bids him to enjoy it. Okay. So when she's done that, the chief then raises his horn and he says, "Let us feast well," or "Sit now to Sumbel and unwind your measures, victory-hearted heroes." That's a quote direct from Beowulf there. And then he takes his first drink and he sits. Okay. Then some blessing is said, probably includes prayers to the gods, although it doesn't actually specifically say that. And then the lady starts to go round and she greets each guest with welcoming words. Okay. And the guest replies formally with some kind of bail, which is a vow or an oath, and words of thanks. A Thiel will challenge the guest's bail, and the guest responds to that. Okay, that's if he thinks it's not, or it's too hard, or it's not suitable vow or oath. And the lady goes round offering the drink to each guest in turn, again based on their status. And each guest has to stand up. They take the vessel and drink it before giving her back the vessel. Okay. And once that's all done, the lady then returns to her seat beside the chief. Okay. Now it's possible that her role could have included more formal announcements or some sort of offering of blessings or uttering prophecy. Like we saw, the woman is being associated with the Norns here, giving the weird or carrying the well of weird, or the Valkyries, who are, and the women in the earlier Germanic cultures where they're very involved with prophecy and stuff. So it could be that she has some sort of role in that, okay, at this same time. And then the guests are greeting each other this time. So they then start to drink to each other's health. They greet each other. For instance, they can say, Westhal, Thuhal, be whole or be healed, be, well, Hal means hail, basically, or whole. So it's Westhal is be thou, or be you whole and holy. The horn goes around the guests clockwise and then is refilled as necessary by the cupbearers. So in this one, you do actually have this central cup going round, but there's other examples where each one has their own cup and the woman goes around and fills it. Okay. We're not really told how it ends in the text. Other parts of Beowulf suggest that gift-giving is also involved. So that's how it would happen in Beowulf. Okay. So let's bring some of this stuff together, okay, to start with, on how to do the Sumbel ourselves, okay? Now, let's think about if we were going to do this as a group, okay? So first, you get your guests or the other members of the group. They're summoned into the hall by blowing a horn. So someone blows a horn, okay? And then they come in, and as they're entering, there's a bowl there for them to wash their hands, okay? So the purification bit. The host, whoever's the host, is going to seat the guests, okay, and they will then go and sit on the high seat. Then you have a lady or cupbearer or whoever is going to do the main carrying of the horn. They enter the hall carrying the horns. They greet the guests and the host and offer the first drink to the host, okay, and also make any important announcements that need to be made. At this point, the host is going to raise the horn and make a speech, finishing with either "Let us feast well" or "Sit now to Sumbel and wind your measures, victory-hearted heroes." Okay, and then they can take a drink and sit down. Okay, and then you're going to want the horn to be blessed. So the host will bless the horn over the fire. So hopefully there's a central fire there. They'll bless the horn over that, maybe with the Thor's hammer as well, and pray some prayers to the gods. Okay. And then the lady and the cupbearers go round and fill each person's cup or horn, say some warm words. The guests stand and respond with thanks. And then after they've gone round and filled everybody's cup, they then return to their seat. Okay, or she returns to her seat, or the ale cup bearer will. It doesn't have to be a woman, but that's the sort of traditional way it was done. And then we start the formal toasting. So you've got your first round is to the gods. So each person can get up, and either there'd be one to a specific god and everybody does it to the same god, or there could be each person does it to whatever god they want to do it to. And you basically say some sort of, it could just be as simple as hail to the gods, hail to Thor, or whatever like that. Or it could be a whole proper prayer to that particular god. Then you have your formal toasting round, okay, of 2, which is the braggerful toast. And this one, each person can make a boast or a vow of what they're going to do, or they can say a poem or something, and then they'll drink from their drink again. And you need to have this style person who can challenge them if necessary. And then you've got your third round, which is the mini toast, and that's honouring the ancestors. Again, each person stands, says an honour, hail the ancestors, or hail such and such person, and then again drinks. Okay, when you finish that, you feast together. Maybe there's some giving of gifts, any further toasting that's wanted, some musical poetry could be said, and then a sort of a closing, some sort of closing speech by the host, and then everybody can process out and leave. Okay, so that's how you would do a Sumbel with a group. Now, let's now bring that back. Let's bring everything together now, okay? All the stuff we've spoken about in the previous videos and the stuff we've spoken about here, okay, to create an outline for how to do a ritual. And this is what the ritual script I'm going to give you is going to be based on, okay? So we're going to start off with step 1. So and there's going to be 9 steps because 9 is a sacred number, okay? And 3 is also a sacred number. So we're going to have 9. We're going to have 9 in this one, okay? This is how I suggest you set out a ritual structure, okay? So firstly, we need to establish the sacred space. And we've already talked in the previous videos about the 9 steps that will establish what the sacred space is and how to do that, okay? So that's step 1, okay? And step 1 is obviously made up of 9 steps, okay? Next, you've got the invocation. So step 2 is invoking the gods or the spirits, okay? You can use a repetitive chant in this as well, like Esir and Elfar, Esir and Elfar, and repeat that maybe 9 times. And then you honor the Earth Mother and possibly the Sky Father as well. Okay. In fact, you could sort of change the order around on these a little bit as well, the way you want to do it. But that's essentially what's going to be involved in step 2, in the invocation. Step 3 is going to be giving your sacrifice. Okay. This is the food and the drink, or maybe it's poem, song, dance, whatever sacrifice you're choosing to give. This stage 3 is your sacrifice part. Stage 4 is the sprinkling, okay, with the plantain, the branch of stuff. So you put the sacrificial liquid, e.g. mead, into the hlot bowl, into your blessing bowl, and then you use that plantain, you dip it in, and you sprinkle the blood, also the mead or whatever it's going to be, the liquid, over the altar, over the gods, over the walls, over the people. Okay, so in this case, if you've got maybe doing something in your home, maybe you'll do it over yourself, maybe you'll do it over your altar space and the statues of the gods and the other offerings and things. Maybe the walls, that's up to you whether you want to do that. But outside, you could do it to the 4 directions as well and things like that. Then you've got the blessing part, okay? This is where the horn of the mead or whatever liquid is going to be passed over the fire, okay? Maybe circumambulate it 3 times in a circle. And then the mead and the food offerings and the feast, they're all blessed, okay? And I would recommend you do this with Thor's hammer. So you hold up the hammer and bless it over, hold it over it and say a blessing over the mead in the horn and also over the food offerings in the feast. Then you come to the sacred meal. So you're going to eat a sacred meal. Now, this could be something as simple as just a little bit of bread and you take some and they take some, okay? Or it can be a whole big meal if you wanted a massive meal with lots of different things involved, okay? So that's stage 6 is the feast. Stage 7 is the Sumbel itself, okay? So this is the toasting rounds. Now, I haven't included all the other little bits and pieces from the Sumbel that we saw just now. I've pulled in the most important parts, but feel free to expand this more or less. Okay, so we've got your toasting round to the gods. So you drink a toast for each god or spirit you're honoring. Then we're going to do the toasting round to the ancestors, the mini, and then we do toasting round to the bragaful basically round, which is where we're either making a vow or oath or saying a poem or song. Okay, or maybe you're honoring the house spirits or the land spirits and things like that. And when you've done all those toasts and you've drunk each time and you've said your words, you then pour out what's left to the Earth Mother and give thanks. Okay. And then we come to the divination stage, just to see that everything was all the offerings were accepted correctly. And maybe to ask for what blessings they're going to give us in return and things like that. Do a divination, just check everything's okay. If it needs more sacrifice, give something else, some more of something. And then lay the runes in the well of water, the well of weird, okay? And then finally, you're going to close down by thanking the gods and spirits and doing a procession back away again. So basically undoing the 9 steps you did originally, okay? So those are the 9 steps I would say that you need to follow to do a ritual in heathenry, okay? Now, other people will do things differently, but I've tried to pull in what I can from the sources, from the lore, from the history, to try and create something that will work and is as close as we can possibly get, in my opinion, to what was done historically, okay? Or at least was inspired by that. I'm going to give you a ritual script that's got the steps on it, and as long with wording and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And you can feel free to change and adapt it to your needs. I would suggest you don't use this outline for small rituals, okay? Because it's quite involved, this lot. You basically want to be doing this for when you're doing like big rituals on your holy days, maybe once a month, maybe only on the 3 main holy days of the year, or whenever it's a really important ritual that you need to do. This is what I would suggest you follow, okay? But in your smaller ones, you can just pick and choose a few bits and pieces from this. Probably the key things for that will just be some simple establishing of sacred space, some invocations, giving a sacrifice, and then maybe a toast or something where you're taking something in yourself. So maybe you sprinkle back on yourself or something, because you're giving first. You're sending energy to the gods, and then you need something coming back to you as well. Okay, so maybe that's drinking as part of a toast or something. Okay, so that is my suggested outline. Please have a look at the ritual script, and you'll see how this can work in practice. All right. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit now about some other types of ritual you could do, particularly, for instance, daily rituals. Okay, you can have some daily blessing rituals. This is more of a modern idea, but you can find examples in historical pagan cultures. And this is basically doing small daily rituals to help keep the gods and spirits in mind as you go through your day. Okay, so they're important to you. You want to keep them on your mind. You want to think about them. But it's easy in the day-to-day bustle of life to forget about it. So you can do these little things that just remind you about your religion, about your spirituality each day. So you could start off with maybe the Sigdriffamil prayer to start your day. Okay, that's the one that says like, hail the gods, hail the gods, hail the goddesses, hail Night and her daughters and things like that. Okay, so there's that prayer you can use. You could get up and wish the gods and the spirits and the ancestors a good morning. Maybe if you go to a room where the altar is, and as you see it, say good morning to them. You could pray a prayer to Suna when you first see the sun, or at sunrise, or at the 3 main points of the day, like sunrise, noon, and sunset. For instance, we've got the Norwegian rune poem, which says, "Sun is the light of the lands, I bow to the holiness," or simply, "Hail Suna." So you could do that. You could pray to the moon when you see it at night, or on specific occasions like the new moon or the full moon. often in folklore it's addressed as Lord. So you could say, "Hail, gracious Lord Mani," or "Gracious Lord Mona." Mani is sort of the Norse Scandinavian, Mona is the Anglo-Saxon. You could hail particular gods when you see certain stars or phenomena. So, for instance, Tyr is associated with the North Star. Frigga is associated with Orion because of the three. Orion's belt basically is called Frigga's distaff, or Thor because Orion is more of a hunter and a hammer hunter with his hammer and stuff. So you could say that, well, that's Thor. So you've got Tyr when you see the North Star, Frigga or Thor when you see Orion, which only happens in the winter, by the way, in the Northern Hemisphere. And then when you see a storm, when there's a storm, you could say "Hail Thor" as well there. You could consider doing stuff when you put your hammer on. Maybe you put your hammer on each morning, and you could say something like, "By the might of Mjolnir, ward me, great Asa Thor, from harm." This comes from Mike Smith. Or "Thunor where dath me, ich bitte thu." That's a Anglo-Saxon Old English way of saying things. And that's what I often say when I put my hammer on. I say, "Thunor where dath me, ich bitte thu," which means Thunor ward me or protect me. I ask you, basically. Before meals, you could say things like "Thank you, Earth Mother," to recognize the fact that the food comes from her. When you're washing in the morning, when you have your shower or whatever, you could do it in a way that you're washing away all ill luck and ill will. Okay, mentally you could think through those things as you're washing it away. And before bed, you could pray for protection for you and your household, or for good dreams. You ask the gods to give you protection. There's a lot of examples in various cultures of prayers before bed for protection and for the household. Okay. So these are just some things you can do on a daily basis to have ritual in your life, just short, small things that you can do. Okay, and that's where we're going to end this video. In the final video, I'm going to go over practical issues, okay, which are going to cover personal ritual and group ritual. But for now, just rewatch the video I've just gone through, make notes if you haven't already, and just get clear in your mind the ritual structures and how it was done historically, and some ideas of how you can do it in a modern day, okay, how you can adapt it to you. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video.